The week this video is being published is an important one in the history of Star Trek. According to the classic two-part Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode, Past Tense, great episode. If you haven't watched it lately, you should treat yourself. September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 2024 are the dates of the Bell Riots, a popular uprising that took place in San Francisco and led to transformative social change in the United States. The Bell Riots are a crucial intersection in history, a point at which events could go one way or another and determine the course for the future. In past tense, Commander Sisko, Dr. Bashir, and Lieutenant Dax accidentally traveled back from their native 24th century to the time of the Bell Riots. Their presence initially changes history so that the Bell Riots don't occur, and as a result, in the future, the Federation and Starfleet never exist. That's how important the Bell Riots are. No Bell Riots, no Star Trek. Well, here we are, early September 2024. No Bell Riots. So what now? I realize that to most of you, hopefully this is a very silly question. I'm right there with you. But indulge me for a few minutes, because questions like this do come up in relation to long-running franchises like Star Trek, and depending on how we approach these questions, they can yield some useful insights. So let's talk about what should happen when history catches up to Star Trek. There are two ways of asking this question, it seems to me. These ways differ depending on what we mean by what should happen. The first way aims the question at Star Trek itself, and by extension at the people who make Star Trek. We might ask that version of the question like this: what should Star Trek do when history catches up to it? This is a question the creators of Star Trek have actually dealt with relatively recently, in fact. Back in the late 1960s, Star Trek, the original series, established that in the history of its fictional timeline, in the mid-1990s, much of planet Earth was ruled by genetically engineered tyrants, the most infamous of whom was named Khan Noonien Singh, or simply Khan. Khan and his fellow so-called supermen were eventually deposed during a series of conflicts collectively known as the Eugenics Wars. The Eugenics Wars, like the Bell Riots, are also a big deal in Star Trek's fictional history. Tens of millions of people died. Global civilization was devastated. In the 1960s, the 1990s was far enough in the future that the writers of Star Trek felt comfortable just making stuff up to suit the needs of their story. After all, they didn't expect that anyone would still be watching this Star Trek shit in 30 years. How ridiculous. But people were still watching and making Star Trek in the 1990s, as it turned out. And as those of us old enough to remember the 90s know, that decade came and went, and no eugenics wars. Which, hey, good for us. But where does that leave Star Trek? How should they deal with this obvious contradiction between their show's fictional history and actual history? One thing they could do is just rewrite their fictional history, and that is what they eventually did. In the episode Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow from Season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Lieutenant La'an Noonien Singh, yes, they're related, and an alternate universe version of James Kirk accidentally travel back in time to Toronto in the early 2020s. Where would Star Trek be without accidental time travel? And during their adventure, La'an and Kirk discover that, due to temporal agents from various factions messing around in Earth's past, the eugenics wars have been delayed and will now occur sometime in the 21st century. Okay? Done and done. The eugenics wars originally took place in the 90s, but now, due to time travel shenanigans, they took place, I don't know, sometime later. Sometime that is still in the future for us in the 2020s. Captain Kirk and Spock and the others in classic Trek referred to the eugenics wars as happening in the 90s because they were experiencing the events of that classic Trek episode before the time travel shenanigans changed history. So everything works. Fair enough. The creators of Star Trek could do something similar with the Bell Riots. Oh, they were supposed to happen in 2024, but then they didn't? Yada, 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 time travel, now they happen in 2054. We good? Good. However, there is another option. It is my preferred option. What should the creators of Star Trek do when history catches up to it? Nothing. When our real history catches up to the history told in Star Trek, there's already a built-in mechanism for resolving any conflict between the two. Star Trek is fiction. Why didn't the eugenics wars happen in the 1990s? Because they happened in Star Trek, and Star Trek is fiction. Why aren't the Bell Riots happening right now, in early September 2024? Because they happened in Star Trek, and Star Trek is fiction. Some of you might say, but wait, doesn't Star Trek need to resolve these inconsistencies between its fictional history and our real history in some explicit in-story way so that creators of future Star Trek projects can refer to those fictional historical events without contradicting real history? Good question. No. These inconsistencies can be a problem when the creators of a new Star Trek story want to reference an event from Star Trek's fictional history that didn't actually occur in reality, but they don't have to be. The eugenics wars are mentioned occasionally in Star Trek Enterprise. That series was produced in the early 2000s, and in it, the eugenics wars are still referred to as having occurred in the late 20th century. Does that contradiction spoil those episodes of the series that refer to the eugenics wars? Not to me. Enterprise has plenty of problems, but a handful of references to events from Star Trek history that didn't happen in real history are not on my list. In its third season, Star Trek Voyager produced a two-parter in which the crew travels back in time to Earth in the year 1996, which was the present day for audiences at the time. The episode, Future's End, was originally broadcast in November 1996. According to the dates established in the classic Trek episode Space Seed and reiterated, or at least not directly contradicted, in the movie Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan in 1996, the eugenics wars should either have been still ongoing or just recently concluded. But when the crew of Voyager beams down to Los Angeles, things look pretty good. They look, more or less, like things really looked in Los Angeles in 1996. No devastating global conflict, no aftermath of a devastating global conflict, no references to an ongoing or recently concluded devastating global conflict. Does that spoil the episode? Again, not for me. Not for most people, it seems like. Everyone who watches my Star Trek stuff regularly knows that Voyager is not my favorite Star Trek series, and Future's End is not my favorite Voyager episode, but, I mean, it's not terrible. It's fun, it's entertaining. It's not great, but like much of Voyager, it's okay. Is it even a sliver of an iota less okay because it doesn't account for the eugenics wars? No, it's not. Who gives a shit? I realize that some of you do give a shit. All I can say is, you have my sympathy. You have a certain amount of my sympathy. If the writers of future Star Trek projects want to refer to the Bell Riots, they should just do it. Do the same thing the writers of those episodes of Star Trek Enterprise did with the eugenics wars. Say the Bell Riots happened. Say they happened in September of 2024, and trust that the audience watching the show will be smart enough to figure out that the reason there were no Bell Riots in September of 2024 in real life is because Star Trek isn't real life. Star Trek is a made-up TV show. By the same token, if the creators of a future Star Trek series have an idea for another time travel episode that takes place in San Francisco in 2024, but it doesn't involve the Bell Riots or sanctuary districts or any of the stuff related to the Bell Riots, they should feel free to do what the creators of Voyager's Future's End did with the eugenics wars and just not worry about it and tell their story. Would that mean the Bell Riots aren't important? No. Would that mean the Bell Riots never happened? No, they happened in past tense. I told you to go watch it. It's a great episode. They just weren't relevant to this hypothetical episode I'm talking about, so they aren't a part of it. The best way to deal with this the Bell Riots never actually happened problem, which isn't really a problem, but I've got to call it something, is simply for future Star Trek shows to not directly refer to it. Write about other stuff. Make up new shit. I realize this may come as a surprise to many of you who have grown accustomed to the ongoing trend of new Star Trek or new Star Wars or new insert your favorite long-running franchise here being about stuff from older entries of those franchises, but it doesn't have to be that way. Until the current production era, much of which I really like, for the record, this isn't me just taking a shit on new Star Trek. I dig new Star Trek. But until the current production era, most new Star Trek was about new stuff. Like, the writers didn't build episodes around references to previous shows in the franchise. They made up new stuff. True, out of the 10 films produced featuring the classic Trek and TNG casts, 2, Wrath of Khan and First Contact, were follow-ups to TV episodes, and out of the hundreds of episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, and Star Trek Enterprise, a handful feature guest appearances by actors from previous series or stories that serve as direct or indirect sequels to episodes from previous series, but the overwhelming majority of those episodes are about new stuff that the writers of those episodes made up for those episodes. And in those episodes about new stuff, if the writer needed to refer to something that happened in the past, instead of reaching for a reference to a past event established in an earlier Star Trek show, they made up something new for that, too. That's how a series like Star Trek keeps going, not through the writers coming up with justifications to bring back old stuff, but through the writers making up new stuff. My point is, as important as the Bell Riots are, there's no reason to fudge the dates on which they took place, because there's no reason why any Star Trek show yet to be made needs to mention them at all. If you saw past tense, you know they happened. You know why they matter. It's not necessary to have Captain Pike talking about them in Strange New Worlds, or Holly Hunter's character, whatever her name winds up being, talking about them in the upcoming Starfleet Academy series. Speaking of Strange New Worlds, the only reason the revising of the date of the eugenics wars in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow doesn't come across to me as an annoying and overly fastidious and unnecessary act of lore mending is that Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is a really, really, really great episode. Make a great episode, tell a great story, and you can do whatever you want. But do creators need to constantly revise the fictional history in order to keep it from contradicting real-life history? Should they be expected to do that? No! They shouldn't worry about it. And they should stop training the audience to worry about it. That's the first way of asking the question. What should Star Trek do when history catches up to it? The second way of asking the question, for me, the far more pertinent way of asking the question, redirects it from Star Trek to Star Trek's audience, to us. What should we do when history catches up to Star Trek? Once again, if you watch my Star Trek stuff regularly, you've heard me say this before. I apologize for repeating myself, but I think it bears repeating. Star Trek is not about people on spaceships in the future. It's about us, on Earth, right now. Yes, it's aspirational. Yes, it's look at how wonderful life could be if only, but that if only is a critique of us, of our choices, our prejudices, our way of life. Sometimes that critique is subtle and implicit, sometimes it's right up in our faces, but it's always at the heart of Star Trek, in all its many forms. The most important thing about the Bell Riots is not whether or not they literally happen to us in our real lives. What matters about the Bell Riots is what they represent, what they remind us of. Remember, the episode depicting the Bell Riots, past tense, originally aired early in 1995. That was less than 3 years after the occurrence of the extremely non-fictional LA riots that took place in the aftermath of 4 Los Angeles police officers being acquitted after standing trial for the brutal beating of Rodney King. Media coverage of the LA riots was nonstop and often veered into sensationalism. Right-wing politicians, including President George H.W. Bush and Vice President Dan Quayle, who were running for re-election that year, characterized the rioters as criminals, as a brutal mob, as people suffering from what Quayle termed a poverty of values. According to opinion polling at the time, nearly 80% of the American public felt the riots were unjustified, though almost as large a percentage also said they disagreed with the acquittal of the LAPD officers which provoked the riots. To be sure, the LA riots are a complex subject, and I'm not going to do anything like a deep dive here. It's possible to condemn what the rioters did while acknowledging the validity of the underlying causes. It's possible to sympathize with the rioters while also condemning the excessive violence and looting that took place. My purpose in bringing them up is to remind you of the context in which past tense and the Bell Riots were created. 3 years after the LA riots, here comes Star Trek with a story about a popular uprising in a major American city with lots of parallels to the LA riots. Like the rioters in LA in 1992, the rioters in past tense are rebelling against oppressive economic conditions. Like the LA riots, the Bell Riots are set off by a conflict between the people and the police. And what is Star Trek's perspective on this? What side does Star Trek take and implicitly ask us to take? It takes the side of the rioters. It embeds our heroes with them. It asks us to see their humanity, to feel their pain, to rage against the injustices that have held them down and brutalized them. Actually, I should correct myself slightly. It embeds 2 of our heroes with the rioters in the Sanctuary District. Dax is initially keeping much fancier company. She's separated from Sisko and Bashir and befriends a rich guy and spends a lot of her time in the episode with his rich friends, and they're just the worst. They're not overtly bad people. They're superficially kind. They exhibit some limited performative empathy for the poor folks in the Sanctuary Districts, but they do nothing to question the system that has trapped those poor people in those sanctuary districts. They do nothing to challenge the injustices that affect the poor. Their wealth and privilege are such that they have nothing more than a faint, abstract awareness of those injustices. They, the beneficiaries of this inequitable social structure, are doing just as much to keep people in those sanctuary districts as the cops who guard the gates. Whether we're following Dax with the high society scumbags or Sisko and Bashir with the residents of the Sanctuary District, the message of past tense is unmistakable. These people have a right to be angry. The social order has penned them in, stripped them of their dignity, robbed them of their futures, and tried to forget about them. And that social order needs to change. So, to bring this around to the subject of the video, what should we do when history catches up to Star Trek? We should take it as an opportunity to compare the world we have to the one Star Trek tells us we could have if we got our shit together. In the fiction of Star Trek, the Bell Riots are happening right now. In the real world, there are no Bell Riots, but there's a lot of stuff that looks awfully similar. Poverty, income inequality, people living in neighborhoods that have been abandoned by state and federal governments, left to decay, forgotten. People victimized by police brutality, by a racist and classist criminal justice system. People taking to the streets or to the campuses of universities, protesting injustice, protesting war and genocide, met with a combination of violent institutional resistance and widespread public indifference. In real life, the Bell Riots are not happening, but many of the things the Bell Riots were meant to remind us of are happening right now. And so the question becomes, whose side are we on? What should we do?